Hey guys, this video is about how to determine what kind of swing pattern your player has. And I've picked two pretty different patterns. This is Brooks Koepka here on the left. This is Rory McIlroy on the right. So they have very different delivery patterns and they have different closure rates. And Rory kind of works the ball both ways and Brooks pretty much hits cuts. Obviously Brooks can hit draws if he needs to, but his stock, we're just kind of going for stock shot under these scenarios. So the first thing I want to point out is that this is the handle path. This is a trace of the grip path and the middle of the grip. So basically Brooks kind of comes up and then he kind of gets over the top of it a little bit. And this club is coming down much steeper. So if you kind of take both these players back, you can see that Rory, this club is underneath his right forearm, and this is above his right arm. So Brooks Koepka kind of hits steep cuts, and Rory kind of hits shallow, either push draws or kind of push cuts. And you'll also notice that this is basically the backswing, this is the downswing, and then this white line here is the follow through. So one of the things that's pretty interesting about this is both these players, that on a driver, the follow through is actually much higher and to the right of the downswing. And in both these players, it's just the opposite for the iron, with irons and low irons, or mid irons and wedges. But interesting how this follow through is much more up like this. So this is how you kind of determine the pattern. If Brooks Koepka came to me and said, hey, I want a lesson, or DJ, or said whatever, it would be very invasive to change his wrist patterns. I remember my friend Boyd Summerhays, when he first started working with Tony, said we were trying so hard to get him into flexion, we almost ruined his career. So Tony has he kind of has a little bit of cup wrist here, and he kind of keeps it cupped later than probably anybody else that we've measured, and then he flexes hard. So, you know, at this stage of a player's career, it's really hard. You know, if somebody came to you and said, hey, fix Dustin Johnson, would you try to get rid of this? And the answer is you got to figure out what your players' abilities are and how far they've gone down the road of doing these patterns, because you can really hurt a player if you try to do drastic movements. Even though it might make sense, but you could really hurt a player if you're not careful. But whenever we see a steeper pattern, we generally see cuts. Almost always. We don't see a lot of players that are kind of coming down steeper and hitting draws. So whenever you have a player that has this kind of steeper pattern, if I wanted to teach him how to hit a draw from here, he obviously knows how to do that, he would have to stall out the turn, which would create a little bit more side bend, and he would have a little bit too much thrust in that scenario. He's already got enough, torso thrust. But you would basically have to really change that pattern. It's very invasive. So really the better idea would be to take this pattern and to match the club up really well and to allow him to turn as much as he can. But that is a cut pattern. That's a cut pattern all day. 100% cut pattern. So I don't want to, it's okay to hit a cut, especially at this speed, and there's nothing wrong with that. And notice that the path doesn't need to go way left to hit a cut. That would be a swipe. He's basically right on top of where he's aiming. The club's pretty much coming right down his kind of a steeper plane, and then that face angle is not going to close. So Brooks Koepka has the lowest closure rate of any tour player that we have measured. And he also has the most shaft droop of any player that we've measured, okay? So his club, he kind of keeps going back to that TaylorMade M5. And I have my suspicions on why, but basically the shaft's drooping quite a bit, the face is open, the ball's not gonna go left, and he needs to just keep playing that pattern and cashing checks. Rory, on the other hand, has options. So there's a difference between, there's a difference between shallowing the club. Shallowing the club would be making the club more horizontal like this. And there's a lot of buzz on tour about that, or on the internet about this right now. But there's also what's called lowering. So you can lower the shaft without shallowing it. You can lower the shaft and have it get steeper. Ricky does this a little bit. And then you can lower the shaft and shallow at the same time. You can do all those things. There's no one law that says, hey, if I push the handle out here, that means that the shaft is going to shallow. I can push the handle out and get steep. So there's a difference between lowering and shallowing. You got to pay attention to that. It's really careful. And just because you do one doesn't mean the other has to happen. It all has to do with the wrist movement and how you twist the club. So in Brooks's case, the club is coming down steep with a very shut face. And if he releases this thing at all, if he starts to add closure rate, we're going to see a two-way miss. We're going to see snap hooks and blocks. Rory, on the other hand, has a lot more advantages. He can actually, maybe not advantages is the right word, but maybe he has more options. That's probably a better one. When the club head is way behind the hand path like this, okay, he can hit that big sling draw. The angle of attack can go way more up. The benefit of high angle of attack is that we can get low lofted clubs and hit that big high launch, low spin head. Brooks's angle of attack is around 2 up. If he right here tried to hit more up on it, that would be problematic. He would have real struggles with that. But because the club is so far behind the handle here, he can actually just kind of keep rotating the body and release, he has a higher rotation rate, higher closure rate, and you'll see that that club kind of comes up and then it shallows under and then it goes through. So his hand path goes up, under, and then through. Brooks goes inside and over a little bit. So these are two very different delivery patterns that you kind of have to match up. So the goal of this video is basically when you have a player that gets steep on the downswing, you really want to try to avoid hitting draws from there. And if you're going to have that pattern, you got to kind of live with that cut, or that straight ball or slight cut, and you build the clubs to match around that. If you're Rory, you can hit all 9 shots in the bag. That's why he does that. He's one of the best drivers in the world. And he basically can hit a big push draw or a big push cut. He can hit it low or high or straight, whatever. He's got a lot of options. Brooks really doesn't have too many options. He can hit kind of a mid to low cut, and both of them have a lot of club head speed, but Rory has more options. So you have to kind of determine the hand path, and gears is the best way to do this. We're the only system in the world that gives you club data and body data so that you can see how that handle's working. So if your hand path, if you get on gears, you can kind of determine what your players what their options are. If we were to take Brooks and shallow him, like Rory, okay, that would maybe ruin his career. But it would give him more options. So you have to determine what's the best option for your player and what they can and can't do.